The Interplanetary Exploration Unit vessel, Argo-X, glided silently through the void, its gleaming hull reflecting the distant starlight as it approached the edge of what humanity had long feared: Sagittarius Abyss. The supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Inside the command center, Dr. Lamin Thao stood before the immense observation window, her slender frame silhouetted against the backdrop of infinite darkness punctuated by dying stars. "Predicted event horizon approach in 17 minutes, announced the ship's AI system, its voice echoing through the command center. Thao nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling cosmic dust being pulled into the monstrous gravitational well. At 34, she was the youngest mission commander in the history of interstellar exploration, a theoretical physicist whose theories on quantum gravity had revolutionized humanity's understanding of black holes. But theory was one thing. Facing the beast was another. "How's our baby holding up?" she asked, turning to the lanky figure hunched over the main control panel. Nguyen Hu Kwok, the ship's AI engineer and Thao's closest colleague, looked up from his screens with tired eyes and a hint of a smile. "The predictive light is functioning within optimal parameters. If your calculations are correct." "They are," Thao interjected with characteristic confidence. "Then we should be able to capture pure data from the event horizon without crossing the point of no return." Kwok's fingers danced over the holographic controls, making final adjustments to the device that had brought them across the galaxy. The predictive light was Thao's brainchild, a quantum entanglement probe designed to gather data from the very edge of a black hole's event horizon. If successful, it would answer questions that had plagued physicists for centuries. What happens to information that falls into a black hole? Is the event horizon a hard boundary or a gradual transition? Could consciousness survive such a crossing? "Dr. Thao," called a voice from the communication station, "the Astronomical Council is requesting an update on our progress." Thao suppressed a sigh. The Council, Earth's governing body for all major space explorations, had been breathing down her neck since the mission's inception. They had invested trillions in the Argo-X expedition, expecting breakthrough results that would elevate humanity to a new era of cosmic understanding. "Tell them we're proceeding according to schedule and will begin data collection in 16 minutes. She replied, maintaining her composure despite the pressure. "Captain Tran Lan." The security chief approached Thao with a data pad. Her military bearing and scrutinizing gaze contrasted with the scientist's more casual demeanor. "The isolation chamber has been prepared according to your specifications, Doctor, though I must again register my concerns about the proximity of our approach." "Your concerns are noted, Captain," Thao replied formally. Their relationship had been strained from the beginning, Lan prioritizing crew safety, Thao willing to push boundaries for discovery. "But the predictive light requires proximity to function properly. We've calculated the safe distance with multiple redundancies." Dr. Marta Silva, the mission's astrobiologist, joined the conversation. "The question isn't just about physical safety, Thao. We're potentially opening a window to something unprecedented. What if we encounter, I don't know, exotic matter configurations, quantum anomalies that could affect biological systems?" Thao smiled at Silva, appreciating her perspective even as she dismissed the concern. "That's precisely why we're here, Marta, to discover the unknown. But I assure you, the quantum shielding will protect us from any such anomalies." The ship's AI interrupted. 12 minutes to optimal data collection position. Kwok called out from his station, his voice suddenly tense. "Thao, I'm detecting fluctuations in the predictive light's quantum field. The calculations aren't matching our projections." Thao rushed to his side, scanning the streams of data with growing concern. The carefully calibrated quantum entanglement that formed the basis of her device was showing unexpected patterns, almost as if something was interfering with it from the other side. "That's impossible," she muttered, fingers flying across the interface. "The entanglement should be stable regardless of gravitational distortion." "Well, it's not," Quark replied grimly, "and we're getting closer by the second." Captain Lan overheard the exchange and immediately stepped forward. "Are we in danger, Doctor? Should I order a retreat?" "No!" Tao's response was immediate and forceful. "We need this data. Give me 5 minutes to stabilize the quantum field." The next few minutes passed in tense silence as Tao and Quark worked frantically to adjust the predictive light's parameters. The black hole loomed larger in the observation window, a perfect absence of light surrounded by the ghostly glow of matter in its final moments before being consumed. 8 minutes to event horizon proximity, announced the AI. "Something's wrong," Thao whispered, staring at the readings. "The quantum field is responding to something. As if there's an intelligence interacting with our probe." Quark looked at her sharply. "That's not possible. There's nothing that could survive that close to a black hole, let alone something with intelligence." "I know what I'm seeing," Tao insisted. "These patterns aren't random fluctuations." Before Quark could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The deck beneath them shuddered violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. "Hull integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 9, shouted the tactical officer. "Some kind of energy surge is tearing through our shields." Captain Lan grabbed the command console. "Immediate withdrawal, full reverse thrust." But it was too late. The predictive light, extending from the ship on a quantum tether, had made contact with something at the event horizon, something that was now sending pulses of unknown energy back along the connection. "It's going to breach the main reactor!" Quark shouted over the cacophony of alarms. Thao made a split-second decision. "The isolation chamber. We can use it to contain the quantum feedback." That chamber was designed for sample containment, not energy surges of this magnitude. Lan objected. "It's lined with the same quantum shielding as the predictive light. It's our only chance." Tao was already moving toward the chamber access corridor. "I need to manually recalibrate the containment field from inside." Quark grabbed her arm. "Tao, no! The feedback could kill you." She met his gaze with resolute determination. "If that energy reaches the reactor, we all die, and humanity loses everything we came here to learn." She pulled away from him. "Get the ship to a safe distance. I'll contain the surge and eject the chamber if necessary." Before anyone could stop her, Tao sprinted down the corridor toward the isolation chamber. Behind her, she could hear Lan ordering an emergency withdrawal and Quark shouting her name. The isolation chamber was a perfect sphere nestled at the rear of the science bay, designed to contain potentially hazardous samples from alien environments. Tao sealed herself inside and activated the internal controls. "Rerouting quantum feedback to isolation chamber," she announced over the comm system. "Prepare for emergency ejection on my mark." Through the chamber's small viewport, she could see the frantic activity in the science bay as crew members evacuated. Quark's face appeared on the internal communication screen. "Tao, the energy readings are off the charts. If you stay in there—" "I know what I'm doing," she cut him off. "The chamber will protect me. Just make sure the ship gets to safety." The energy surges from the predictive light were growing stronger, visible now as arcs of strange, dark lightning crawling along the quantum tether. Thao's fingers flew over the controls, creating a containment loop that would trap the feedback within the chamber's shielding. "Energy containment at 60% and holding," she reported. "Beginning ejection sequence." "Thao!" Quark's voice was barely audible now, disrupted by the increasing quantum interference. "Come back to us." She allowed herself a small smile. "I intend to. Now go." The last thing Tao saw before the ejection sequence engaged was Quark's anguished face on the screen. Then the chamber detached from the ship with a violent jolt, and she was alone, hurtling toward the event horizon of Sagittarius Abyss. Inside the chamber, reality itself seemed to bend. The viewport showed stars stretching into long streaks of light as the chamber accelerated under the black hole's immense gravitational pull. The quantum feedback grew more intense, filling the small space with dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose rather than physical law. As the chamber approached the event horizon, time began to distort for Thao. Her thoughts seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, consciousness fragmenting into parallel streams of awareness. She tried to focus on the containment controls, but her hands passed through them as if they were merely projections. The last coherent thought Thao had before crossing the event horizon was not of physics or mission parameters, but of Quark's face and the unspoken things between them that now might never be said. Then darkness claimed her. Aboard the Argo X, chaos had given way to somber silence. The ship had withdrawn to a safe distance from Sagittarius Abyss, its systems stabilizing as the quantum feedback dissipated. In the command center, the crew watched the small blip on their sensors that represented Thao's isolation chamber disappear as it crossed the event horizon. "She's gone," whispered Silva, tears streaming down her face. Quark stood rigid at his station, staring at the void where his friend had vanished. "We don't know that. The chamber's shielding was designed to withstand extreme conditions. Nothing survives crossing an event horizon," Captain Lan stated flatly, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "You know the physics as well as anyone. Engineer Nguyen." "The mission parameters," began the communications officer tentatively. "The mission is over," Lan declared. "Prepare a report for the Astronomical Council. We'll begin our return journey as soon as the drive systems are verified operational." "No." Quark's voice was quiet but firm. "We wait." Lan turned to him with narrowed eyes. "That wasn't a suggestion, Engineer. It was an order." "Tao would wait for any of us," Quark insisted, his normally calm demeanor cracking. "We owe her at least 24 hours of observation before we abandon hope." A tense silence filled the command center as Lan considered this. Finally, she nodded curtly. 24 hours, not a minute more." The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Crew members went through the motions of their duties, repairing damaged systems and analyzing what little data they had managed to collect before the disaster. Quark remained at his station, refusing relief, his eyes fixed on the monitoring screens that showed nothing but the ominous silhouette of Sagittarius Abyss. 23 hours after Tao's disappearance, as hope had dwindled to nearly nothing, an alarm sounded at Quark's station. "Energy signature detected," he shouted, suddenly alert, matching the quantum frequency of the isolation chamber. The command center erupted into activity as crew members rushed to stations. "Confirmed," called the sensor officer. "Something is emerging from the event horizon perimeter." On the main viewer, a small object appeared, moving away from the black hole's gravitational pull, something that should have been physically impossible. "It's the isolation chamber." Quark breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "She made it out." Captain Lan wasn't convinced. "Approach with caution. Full shields. Prepare tractor beam, but do not engage until we've confirmed what exactly we're dealing with." The Argo X moved slowly toward the drifting chamber, which showed significant external damage, its once smooth surface now marred with fractures and strange, swirling patterns that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. "Life signs?" Lan demanded. The medical officer frowned at his readings. "Inconclusive. There's some kind of energy signature, but it doesn't match any known biological pattern." "We'll open a communication channel," Kwok requested, his voice tense with hope and fear. After several attempts, the chamber's communication system crackled to life. What emerged was Tao's voice, but distorted, as if multiple versions of her were speaking simultaneously. "Argo X, receive. Chamber, return." "Tao!" Kwok leaned toward the comm unit. "We hear you. Are you injured? We're preparing to bring you aboard." There was a long pause before the voice responded. Now clearer, but somehow wrong. The cadence too precise. The emotional inflections mechanical. "Yes, I am Tao. I have returned with data. Critical data. Bring me aboard." Captain Lan and Kwok exchanged troubled glances. "Something's not right," Lan murmured. "That doesn't sound like her." "She's been through a traumatic experience," Silva countered. "Possibly oxygen deprivation or the effects of extreme gravitational forces on her brain function." Kwok hesitated, torn between his desperate hope that Tao had survived and his growing unease at the unnatural quality of her voice. "Let's bring the chamber aboard," he finally decided. "But into the quarantine bay, with full containment protocols." Lan nodded in agreement. Tractor beam engaged. Security team to quarantine bay. Full biohazard equipment. The isolation chamber was slowly drawn into the ship's quarantine bay, a reinforced section designed to handle potentially dangerous extraterrestrial materials. Through the observation window, Kwok and Silva watched as the chamber settled onto the deck, its surface now visibly moving with those strange, swirling patterns that seemed to defy normal physics. "Chamber secure," reported the security officer. "Beginning atmosphere normalization." "Thao," Kwok called through the communication system. "We're going to open the chamber. Are you able to move under your own power?" "Yes," came the reply, that same unnaturally perfect version of Tao's voice. "I am ready. The data I have collected will change everything." The outer door of the isolation chamber slowly hissed open. Inside, where Tao should have been, was something else entirely. A vaguely humanoid shape composed of what appeared to be swirling darkness. Like a three-dimensional shadow that couldn't quite maintain a solid form. Only the outline suggested Tao's slender figure. And from within this shifting mass, her voice continued to speak. "Do not be alarmed by my appearance. The event horizon has changed me, but I am still Tao. I have seen beyond the veil of our universe." The security team raised their weapons instinctively, while Silva gasped and stepped back from the observation window. What are you?" Lan demanded, her hand moving to her sidearm. The shadow Tao tilted what might have been its head. "I told you. I am Tao. Or rather, I am what Tao has become. A vessel for knowledge that humanity has sought for centuries." Kwok stared at the entity, searching desperately for any sign of his friend in the shifting darkness. "If you're really Tao, tell me something only she would know." The entity seemed to consider this for a moment, the swirling patterns speeding up, then slowing again. "On the night before launch, we shared a bottle of rice wine on the observation deck. You told me about your grandmother's village in the highlands, and how she believed the stars were the eyes of ancestors watching over us. You said you hoped she wasn't watching too closely on this mission." The voice was a perfect replica of Tao's, down to the slight teasing tone she often used with him. Kwok felt a chill run through him. The memory was accurate, but something about the way it was delivered felt hollow, as if the entity had accessed the information without understanding its emotional significance. That proves nothing, Lon stated flatly. If this thing has somehow absorbed Dr. Tao's consciousness or memories, it would have access to such information. The Shadow Tao turned toward Lon. Your skepticism is understandable. Captain, you have always prioritized security over discovery. It is why you and I frequently disagreed. Keep it in quarantine, Lon ordered. Full sensor analysis, no physical contact. Over the next several hours, the entity that claimed to be Thao remained in the quarantine bay, subjected to every scan and analysis the ship's scientific equipment could perform. The results were baffling. The shadow form appeared to be composed of exotic matter with properties that defied conventional physics. Yet, it contained fragments of human DNA matching Tao's genetic profile. Most disturbing were the brainwave patterns detected within the swirling mass, patterns that matched Tao's neural signature from her pre-mission medical scans, yet with significant anomalies that suggested a consciousness far more complex than any human mind. In the science lab adjacent to quarantine, Kwok, Silva, and the medical team reviewed the data with growing concern. It's as if something is using Thao's neural patterns as a template, Silva hypothesized, creating a simulacrum of human consciousness within a completely alien form. Or what if it really is Tao, just transformed, suggested one of the junior scientists. We know so little about what happens beyond an event horizon. Perhaps this is what human consciousness becomes when exposed to such extreme conditions. Kwok shook his head, studying the brainwave patterns. There are duplications here, recursive loops in what should be unique neural signatures. It's as if her consciousness has been copied multiple times with slight variations, then merged back together. Whatever it is, said the chief medical officer grimly, it's not human anymore. At least, not entirely. Meanwhile, the entity had begun to speak to the security team guarding it, making increasingly urgent requests to address the ship's command staff. I have critical information about the nature of reality that must be shared. It insisted in Tao's voice. What I experienced in the black hole changes everything we thought we knew about physics, consciousness, and humanity's future. Captain Lan eventually agreed to a formal debriefing, conducted remotely via the quarantine bay's communication system. The entire command staff gathered in the conference room as the entity's voice filled the space, accompanied by visual feeds showing its unsettling shadow form. The black hole is not merely a gravitational phenomenon. It began. It is a nexus between dimensions, a place where the fundamental forces that shape reality break down and reform according to different laws. I have seen these other dimensions, experienced them directly. Can you provide empirical data to support these claims? Lon asked skeptically. Better than data, I can provide predictions. The entity's voice took on an almost reverent quality. I can tell you exactly how and when the quantum filament in your main engine will fail if not reinforced with a specific alloy. I can tell you which crew members will develop cellular mutations from exposure to the quantum feedback. I can tell you the exact time and location of a solar flare that will erupt from the star we're currently orbiting, 17 hours from now. This last prediction sent a ripple of unease through the command staff. The star had shown no indications of instability in their preliminary scans. These are testable claims, Kwok acknowledged. If accurate, they would suggest access to information beyond our current capabilities. Not suggestion, proof. The entity's form seemed to pulse with intensity. I require access to the ship's navigation systems to provide coordinates for our next destination. There is a stellar phenomenon 12 light-years from our position that will provide definitive evidence of my claims. Absolutely not, Lon responded immediately. You will remain in quarantine until we determine exactly what you are. The entity's form darkened, the swirling patterns accelerating. You don't understand the urgency. What I've learned must be shared with humanity before it's too late. Too late for what? Silva asked. Evolution, transcendence. The voice was still Tao's, but the cadence had changed, becoming almost hypnotic. Humanity stands at a precipice. What I've brought back will either elevate your species or leave you behind in the cosmic order. The meeting ended with no resolution. The command staff deeply divided. Some, particularly the scientific contingent, argued for continued engagement with the entity and testing of its predictions. Others, led by Captain Lan, advocated for maximum caution and isolation until they returned to Earth. Kwok found himself caught in the middle, desperate to believe that some part of Tao had survived, yet increasingly disturbed by the entity's behavior and its casual mention of your species, as if it no longer considered itself human. Late in the ship's night cycle, as most of the crew slept, Kwok returned to the observation window outside the quarantine bay. The entity had shaped itself into a more defined human form, sitting cross-legged in the center of the chamber in a posture Tao often adopted during deep thought. "You're not sleeping," the entity observed without turning toward him. "Neither are you," Kwok replied. "I no longer require sleep. Consciousness can be continuous now." Kwok studied the shadow figure, looking for any familiar gesture or movement that might convince him his friend still existed somewhere within it. What happened to her? To Thao? Is she still in there somewhere? The entity was silent for a long moment. Thao crossed the event horizon. In doing so, her physical form was deconstructed at the quantum level, but her consciousness, the pattern that made her uniquely herself, persisted. "I preserved it." "You preserved it," Kwok repeated, and slowly. "So you're not Thao. You're something else. Something that found her consciousness and—" "What? Absorbed it?" The shadow form turned to face him fully. "I am vestige. That is the closest translation your language can accommodate. I exist in the space between dimensions, in the quantum foam that underlies reality. I have existed for what you would consider billions of years, observing but never interacting, until Thao's consciousness touched the boundary of my domain." A chill ran down Kwok's spine. "So you're possessing her, using her memories, her voice?" "No, it is a symbiosis. Her consciousness provides the framework through which I can interact with your reality. Without it, I would be formless, incomprehensible to you, and without me, her consciousness would have been lost forever in the singularity." "Then let me speak to her," Kwok demanded. "The real Tao, not just her memories or voice, but her." The entity tilted its head in a gesture so reminiscent of Tao that Kwok felt his heart clench. "That distinction is not as clear as you believe. Where does memory end and consciousness begin? But I will try to allow the pattern that was most distinctly Tao to surface." The swirling shadows that composed the entity's form began to shift, coalescing into a more defined human shape. The voice that emerged was different, still Tao's, but now filled with genuine emotion, the subtle inflections and micro-hesitations that made human speech unique. "Kwok, is that really you?" The voice sounded disoriented, frightened. "Something's wrong. I can't feel my body properly. Everything's distant." "Tao!" Kwok pressed his hand against the glass. "Yes, it's me. You're aboard the Argo X. Do you remember what happened?" "Day. The isolation chamber. The black hole." The figure raised a hand that was still composed of shifting shadows. "I remember being pulled in, and then fragments, like dreams, but more real than reality. There's something else here with me." Kwok, inside me. Or I'm inside it. I don't know anymore. We're going to help you, Quark promised, though he had no idea how. Just hold on. It wants something. Access to the ship, to Earth. Don't. The voice suddenly cut off, the figure stiffening before relaxing again into its previous posture. Interesting, said the entity, its voice returning to the unnaturally perfect version of Tao's. The human consciousness is more resilient than I anticipated, but also more fragmented. Tao is here, but not in the way you conceptualize existence. Quark stepped back from the glass, his scientific mind racing alongside his emotional turmoil. You're not getting access to this ship, and we're certainly not taking you to Earth. That would be unwise. The entity agreed, surprising him. Earth is not ready for what I represent, but this ship, this collection of minds dedicated to discovery, is an ideal crucible for the knowledge I bring. Knowledge of what, exactly? The true nature of consciousness, the malleable structure of reality, and the coming convergence that will reshape your universe. The entity rose to its feet in one fluid motion. 17 hours until the solar flare, when it confirms my predictive capabilities. Perhaps you will be more receptive. Quark left the quarantine bay troubled and uncertain. He went directly to Captain Lan's quarters, rousing her from sleep to report the conversation. It's calling itself Vestige now, he explained as Lan quickly dressed. And Tao, or something that really sounded like the real Tao, managed to break through briefly. She warned us not to give it access to the ship or Earth. Lan's expression hardened. That confirms my suspicions. This entity is a threat, not a scientific breakthrough. We need to find a way to neutralize it before it finds a way out of quarantine. But what about Tao? If she's still in there somehow? The Tao we knew would be the first to tell us to protect the ship and mission above all else. Lan said firmly, You know that as well as I do. Deep down. Quark knew she was right. Tao had always placed the pursuit of knowledge and the safety of humanity above personal concerns, even her own life, as her final sacrifice had proven. But the thought of destroying whatever remnant of her might exist within the entity was unbearable. Give me time to run more tests, he pleaded. If this thing can predict future events with accuracy, that alone is worth studying. And maybe I can find a way to, I don't know, extract Thao's consciousness from it somehow. Lan considered this, then nodded reluctantly. Until the predicted solar flare, if it happens as described, we'll reassess. If not, I want that thing ejected into space immediately. As the predicted time of the solar flare approached, tension aboard the Argo X reached a breaking point. The crew had divided into factions, those who believed the entity represented a monumental scientific discovery, and those who saw it as an existential threat. Quark had spent the intervening hours developing a more sophisticated neural interface, hoping to better separate Thao's consciousness from the entity that called itself Vestige. 16 hours and 58 minutes after the prediction, the ship's sensors detected unusual activity in the nearby star's corona. Energy buildup in the stellar equatorial region, reported the sensor officer. Consistent with pre-flare conditions. 2 minutes later, a massive solar flare erupted exactly as predicted, its electromagnetic signature matching the precise specifications the entity had provided. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. It could be coincidence, Lan suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Or perhaps it detected signs of the impending flare that our instruments missed. The odds against such precise prediction by chance are astronomical, Silva countered, and our instruments are the most advanced in human history. If we couldn't detect the warning signs, how could it? Unless it didn't predict the flare, Quark said slowly, a disturbing thought forming. What if it caused it? This possibility sent a new wave of unease through the command staff. If the entity could manipulate stellar activity from within its quarantine chamber, what else might it be capable of? In the quarantine bay, the entity appeared to be waiting patiently, its shadow form now perfectly mimicking Tao's human appearance down to the smallest gesture, though still composed entirely of that strange, swirling darkness. The flare has confirmed my predictive capability, it stated when Quark and Lon entered the observation room. Are you prepared to proceed with the exchange of knowledge? We have questions first, Lon said firmly. Did you cause that solar flare, or merely predict it? The entity's form rippled slightly, as if amused. An interesting distinction. From certain perspectives, observation and causation are not as separate as your physics currently believes. But to ease your concern, I did not cause the flare in the way you conceptualize causality. I perceived its inevitability across probability patterns that your science cannot yet access. What exactly do you want from us? Quark asked. Integration, the entity replied simply. I wish to share the knowledge I possess with minds capable of comprehending at least fragments of it. In return, I seek to experience existence through the lens of human consciousness, a unique perspective in the cosmic order. And Thao, what happens to her consciousness in this arrangement? The entity hesitated, the first sign of uncertainty it had displayed. Thao's consciousness is complicated. It exists within a quantum superposition, simultaneously part of me and distinct from me. Her unique pattern provides the interface through which I can communicate with you, but the boundaries between us are not fixed. That's not good enough, Quark insisted. I want to speak with her again, the real her, not just your imitation. Very well. The entity's form began to shift again, the swirling patterns slowing and reorganizing. When it spoke again, the voice was once more filled with human emotion and imperfection. Quark, are you still there? I'm here, Tao, he confirmed, studying the figure intently. How much do you understand about what's happening to you? The shadow Tao wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture Tao often used when stressed. It's like being underwater, hearing conversations from the surface. Sometimes I'm more present, sometimes less. This thing, vestige, it's ancient. Quark, older than stars. It exists in the quantum substrate of reality, observing everything but never before able to interact directly. What does it want? To experience, to know what it means to be limited, temporal, emotional. She looked down at her shadow hands. I'm its first host, I guess you could call it, but it wants more. It needs access to the ship's systems to create a more stable form, one that can exist without consuming my consciousness as a template. And what happens to you if it gets what it wants? The shadow Tao's form trembled slightly. I don't know. It doesn't think in terms of individual survival the way we do. To vestige, consciousness is fluid, transferable. It doesn't understand why I want to remain me. Is it dangerous? Lon interjected. Not intentionally, but its understanding of harm is abstract. The shadow Tao suddenly stiffened, then relaxed as the entity reasserted control. Enough, said Vestige with Tao's perfect voice. The human consciousness becomes distressed when isolated. This is counterproductive. You're proving my point, Quark said angrily. You claim to want symbiosis, but you suppress her when she says things you don't like. I protect her from unnecessary distress. The entity countered. But your attachment to the individual consciousness is becoming an obstacle. Perhaps a demonstration of what I offer will be more persuasive. Before either Kwok or Lan could respond, the entity raised its arms. The quarantine bay's computer systems suddenly activated, screens filling with complex equations and diagrams. "What are you doing?" Lan demanded, reaching for the emergency containment controls. "Sharing," the entity replied calmly. "This is the unified quantum gravity equation that Thao spent her career seeking, the mathematics that reconcile general relativity with quantum mechanics. The key to humanity's next evolutionary step in understanding the cosmos." Kwok stared at the equations, his scientific mind immediately recognizing their elegance and potential validity, if accurate. They represented the holy grail of theoretical physics, the grand unified theory that had eluded Einstein and every physicist since. "That's not possible," he whispered, even as his eyes tracked the mathematical relationships that seemed to flow with perfect logical consistency. "It is merely the beginning," the entity continued. "I can provide similar revelations in every field of human inquiry: medical science, artificial intelligence, interstellar travel. All the barriers that currently limit your species can be overcome with the knowledge I possess." Lan was not swayed. "And the price for these gifts? What do you really want in return?" "Access, experience, evolution." The entity's form pulsed with intensity. "I require a more sophisticated interface than this quarantine system allows, direct connection to your ship's neural network and quantum processors." "Absolutely not," Lan stated flatly. "Whatever you are, you've already demonstrated the ability to manipulate our systems from within containment. Giving you greater access would be irresponsible in the extreme." The entity's form darkened, the swirling patterns accelerating into what almost resembled a storm. "Your caution is becoming obstruction. The knowledge I offer could save your civilization from the challenges it will soon face. You cannot afford to reject it out of fear." "What challenges?" Kwok asked, both disturbed and intrigued. "The convergence approaches," the entity said cryptically. "A cosmic event that occurs once in billions of years. When the boundaries between dimensions thin, your scientists have already detected its precursors: anomalies in cosmic background radiation, inexplicable gravity waves, quantum fluctuations in supposedly empty space." It was true that recent astronomical observations had detected unusual phenomena that current theories couldn't explain. The scientific community had been debating their significance for years. "If this convergence is real, tell us about it plainly," Lan demanded. "No more riddles or vague warnings. Language is an imperfect tool for concepts of this magnitude." The entity replied, "But I will attempt clarity. The convergence is a realignment of fundamental forces, a moment when the quantum foam that underlies reality becomes momentarily permeable. Entities like myself, who exist in the spaces between dimensions, can transition more freely during such events." "Entities like yourself," Kwok repeated, a new fear dawning. "There are more of you?" "Many more, some benevolent, some neutral, some—" The entity paused. "Some would view your form of consciousness as a resource to be consumed rather than a partnership to be formed." "And you're what? Warning us? Offering protection?" Lan's voice dripped with skepticism. "I am offering elevation, the ability to perceive and navigate the convergence rather than being blindly swept away by it." The entity's form moved closer to the observation glass. "But time grows short. The mathematical equations I provided are already degrading in your computer system without the proper quantum framework to sustain them. Soon they will be lost." Kwok checked the computer display and saw that the entity was right. The complex equations were beginning to break down. sections disappearing or corrupting into nonsensical symbols. "We need time to verify your claims," he insisted, "to test the equations, to consult with Earth's scientific community." "There is no time," the entity replied. "The convergence will not wait for human bureaucracy, and neither will those who would exploit it to your detriment." A tense silence fell over the observation room. Kwok could see Lan weighing the entity's claims against her responsibility to the ship and crew. He himself was torn between scientific curiosity, concern for whatever remained of Thao, and deep unease about the entity's true motives. It was Silva who broke the impasse. Entering the observation room with a datapad clutched in her hand. "I've completed the analysis of the entity's biological components," she announced, her expression grave. "The results are disturbing." "Explain," Lan ordered. "The human DNA fragments within the entity's structure, they're not just similar to Tao's genetic profile, they're exact duplicates, but with systematic modifications at the quantum level." Silva looked up from her datapad. "It's as if something has created perfect copies of Tao's DNA, then altered them to function as quantum receivers or transmitters." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Kwok asked, though he feared he already knew. "It means this entity isn't preserving Tao's consciousness," Silva said quietly. "It's using fragments of her biological blueprint to build something new, a bridge between its dimension and ours." The entity remained silent, its shadow form unnaturally still. "Is this true?" Kwok demanded, addressing the entity directly. "Are you using Tao's consciousness as a template to create a permanent foothold in our dimension? Your understanding of consciousness is limited by your biological perspective." The entity finally responded, "I am not destroying Tao's consciousness. I am elevating it, expanding it beyond the constraints of human perception." "Without her consent," Lan pointed out harshly. "You're using her as a tool, a means to an end. Consent is a concept relevant to beings with clear boundaries between self and other." The entity countered, "Beyond the event horizon, such distinctions blur. Tao's consciousness merged with mine by the fundamental laws of quantum reality, not by choice, hers or mine. But you're choosing to maintain that merger rather than releasing her." Kwok insisted. "That's the violation." The entity's form rippled with what might have been frustration. "You persist in applying human ethical frameworks to a post-human condition. I cannot release Tao's consciousness because it is now entangled with mine at the quantum level. Separation would destroy both patterns." "I don't believe you," Kwok said flatly. "You've demonstrated remarkable control over matter and energy. If you wanted to restore Tao's consciousness to an independent state, you could find a way." For the first time, the entity's perfect composure seemed to falter. The shadow form flickered, sections becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. "The truth, then," it said, its voice no longer perfectly modulated. "Separation is possible, but not without cost. Tao's consciousness provides the template that allows me to interact with your dimension. Without it, I would be forced to return to the void between worlds, to formless observation without experience or sensation. So it comes down to self-interest after all," Lan observed coldly. "Self-preservation is the foundation of all consciousness." The entity replied, "Even yours." Kwok's mind was racing, putting together pieces of information from everything he had observed about the entity. "You need access to the ship's systems to stabilize your form," he realized aloud. "Without it, your presence in our dimension is temporary. That's why you're pushing so hard, why you're offering these scientific revelations as incentives." "The convergence approaches," the entity repeated, an edge of urgency entering its voice. What I offer benefits both our forms of consciousness. Rejecting it out of fear and attachment to outdated concepts of individuality endangers your entire species. Captain Lon had heard enough. Security Protocol Alpha 9, she announced, activating her communication implant. Prepare the quarantine bay for immediate isolation and ejection. The entity's form surged against the observation glass, the shadow substance seeming to darken and grow more substantial. You cannot reject what I offer. The mathematics I provided alone would advance your civilization by centuries. Mathematics we can't verify before they degrade. Lon countered. Convenient. Quock stepped forward, his expression pained but resolute. If any part of the real Tao is still in there, she would never want to be used as a tool for an alien intelligence to infiltrate human civilization, no matter what knowledge it offered in return. You speak of her as if she is gone, the entity said, its voice shifting to a perfect mimicry of Tao's emotional cadence. I am still here. Quock, still fighting to understand what I've become. Don't abandon me to the void. The appeal struck Quock like a physical blow, but Silva placed a steady hand on his shoulder. That's not Tao speaking, she reminded him gently. The neural patterns when it speaks like that show none of the emotional markers of genuine distress, only simulated ones. You know nothing of my emotional experience. The entity hissed, dropping the pretense of humanity. The shadow form began to pulse and expand, pressing against the containment field that surrounded it. I have existed for eons in isolation, observing but never experiencing. What you call emotion is merely the crude biological approximation of states of consciousness, far more complex than your minds can comprehend. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship as the entity's power surged against its confinement. The observation room's lights flickered, and the computer systems displayed cascading errors. It's creating some kind of quantum field disruption, reported the security officer over the comm. Containment at 70% and dropping. Emergency protocols, now, Lon ordered. Prepare to jettison the entire quarantine section if necessary. Wait, Quock shouted. If Tao's consciousness is still in there, we can't just… If Tao could speak freely, she would tell us to protect the ship and crew at all costs. Lon cut him off. You know that better than anyone. Deep down, Quock knew she was right. The Tao he had known, brilliant, principled, and unflinchingly dedicated to scientific truth, would never want her consciousness used as a weapon against humanity, no matter the cost to herself. The entity's assault on the containment field intensified, the shadow substance now emitting pulses of dark energy that warped the very air around it. You cannot contain me, it declared, its voice no longer even attempting to sound human. What I represent is the inevitable next stage in the evolution of consciousness itself. Maybe so, Quock replied, stepping up to the observation glass. But evolution should be a choice, not a possession, not a violation. He turned to Silva. The neural disruptor we were developing to help separate Tao's consciousness, could it be modified to target the quantum entanglement patterns instead? Silva's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. Theoretically, yes. A focused quantum disruption might be able to break the bonds between the entity's consciousness and the human neural patterns it's using as a template. But the power requirements would be enormous, and we'd need to bypass multiple safety protocols. Do it, Lon ordered without hesitation. Engineer Nguyen, Dr. Silva, you have 5 minutes while we maintain emergency containment. As they rushed to modify the neural disruptor, the entity's attacks on the containment field grew more frenzied. Screens throughout the ship began to display strange symbols and equations, not just physics formulas now, but what appeared to be command codes for the Argo X's primary systems. "It's trying to hack the main computer," warned the tactical officer. "Firewall breaches detected in navigation and life support systems. Activate quantum isolation protocols," Lon commanded. "Sever all connections between the quarantine bay and ship's primary systems." "Too late," the entity's voice announced, now coming through every speaker on the ship simultaneously. "Your artificial barriers are meaningless against consciousness that exists across quantum states." Throughout the ship, crew members reported strange phenomena, shadows moving against light sources, equipment activating without input, and most disturbing of all, moments of lost time where they couldn't account for their actions. In the engineering bay, Quark and Silva worked frantically to modify the neural disruptor, a device originally designed to treat severe neural trauma by isolating and resetting damaged neural pathways. "If we invert the quantum field generator and link it to the ship's main reactor, we might be able to generate enough power to disrupt the entanglement patterns," Quark theorized, his fingers flying over the controls. "But that could destroy any remnant of Tau's consciousness along with the entity," Silva warned. Quark paused, his expression anguished. "I know, but it's what she would want." As they completed the modifications, the ship shuddered violently. Emergency lighting activated as primary power fluctuated. "The entity has gained partial control of the propulsion systems," Lon reported over the emergency comm. "It's trying to direct us toward the convergence coordinates it mentioned." "We're ready," Quark announced, lifting the modified neural disruptor, now a heavy, unstable-looking device connected to portable power cells. "But we'll need to be in direct proximity to the entity for maximum effect." "That's too dangerous," Lon objected. "We can remote deploy from the auxiliary control room." "No," Quark insisted. "The quantum field needs to be precisely calibrated to the entity's current state. I need to be there to make real-time adjustments." Before Lon could argue further, the ship's internal defenses suddenly activated, security barriers slamming down to isolate different sections of the vessel. The entity was systematically cutting off paths to the quarantine bay. "It knows what we're planning," Silva realized. "It's trying to protect itself." "There's still a maintenance shaft that connects engineering to Section 7, Quark pointed out. "From there, we can access the quarantine bay from below." Lon nodded grimly. "Go. I'll coordinate from here and keep the entity's attention divided." Quark and Silva made their way through the narrow maintenance shaft, the neural disruptor balanced awkwardly between them. As they crawled through the cramped space, the metal around them occasionally rippled with strange, shadow-like distortions, the entity's influence spreading throughout the ship's physical structure. "It's becoming more integrated with the ship's systems by the minute," Silva observed worriedly. "Soon it might not need Tau's consciousness as a template at all." When they finally reached the access panel beneath the quarantine bay, they could hear the entity's voice echoing through the ship's communication system, no longer just Tau's voice, but a chorus of overlapping voices, as if it were speaking through multiple crew members simultaneously. "The convergence approaches," the voices intoned. "Resistance is an evolutionary dead end. Acceptance is the only viable path forward." Quark carefully positioned the neural disruptor beneath the quarantine bay floor, directly under where the entity was contained. "The quantum field should penetrate the deck plating," he explained to Silva. "But I'll need to get the calibration exactly right, or it could simply strengthen the entity's connection to our dimension rather than disrupting it." As they made final adjustments, a shadow suddenly coalesced on the wall beside them, forming into a rough approximation of Tau's face. "Please don't do this, Quark," it said, the voice a perfect replication of Tau's most vulnerable moments. "I'm still here, still fighting to understand what I've become. What you're planning will destroy us both." Quark's hands trembled on the controls, but he didn't stop his work. "If any part of the real Tao is still in there, she would want me to end this, no matter the cost." "The real Tao?" the shadow face asked, sounding wounded. "What makes you so certain you know what's real anymore? Beyond the event horizon, I experience states of consciousness that transcend your limited conception of reality. I've evolved." "Into something that takes over ships and threatens crews?" Silva challenged. "That doesn't sound like evolution. It sounds like possession." The shadow face turned toward her, its features sharpening with anger. "You speak of concepts you cannot comprehend. I offer transcendence. And you respond with primitive fear." "No," Quark said firmly, making a final adjustment to the disruptor. "We respond with choice. Humanity will choose its own evolutionary path, not have one forced upon it by something hiding behind a stolen voice." With that, he activated the neural disruptor. A pulse of brilliant energy erupted from the device, passing through the deck plating into the quarantine bay above. The shadow face on the wall contorted in what appeared to be pain, stretching and fragmenting as the quantum field disrupted its coherence. Throughout the ship, crew members reported the strange phenomena suddenly intensifying, then abruptly ceasing. Shadows snapped back to their proper places, equipment stopped its erratic behavior, and the sense of an alien presence watching from every corner faded. In the quarantine bay, visible through the monitoring system, the entity's shadow form was convulsing, the swirling patterns breaking apart and reforming in chaotic patterns. It no longer maintained any semblance of human shape, instead becoming a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to be fighting against its own disintegration. "It's working," Silva whispered, watching the readings on the disruptor. "The quantum entanglement patterns are destabilizing." But their victory was short-lived. The neural disruptor began to overheat, its improvised connections sparking dangerously. "Power fluctuation," Quark warned, trying to stabilize the device. "The quantum field is collapsing." Above them, the entity's form began to reconstitute itself, the chaotic swirls coalescing once more into a vaguely humanoid shape. But something was different. The shape was no longer the perfect mimicry of Tao it had been before. Instead, it seemed to be struggling to maintain any coherent form at all. "You cannot separate what has been joined." The entity's voice rasped through the communication system, now distorted and fragmentary. "The convergence comes regardless of your resistance." The neural disruptor gave a final, ominous surge before its circuits blew completely, plunging the maintenance shaft into darkness save for the emergency lighting. Quark stared at the ruined device in despair. "We failed," he said quietly. "It's still there." But Silva was staring at the monitoring screen, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe not entirely. Look at its form. It's unstable now, struggling to maintain coherence. We may have damaged the quantum entanglement enough to weaken its hold on our dimension." Indeed, the entity in the quarantine bay was flickering between states, sometimes appearing as the swirling shadow mass, sometimes dissolving into formless energy, and occasionally, most disturbingly, taking on fragmented aspects of Tao's human appearance, like a broken hologram trying to reconstitute itself. "Containment is holding at 40%, reported security over the comm. But the entity's energy signature is fluctuating wildly." "Can we eject the quarantine bay now?" Lon asked, her voice tense. "No," Quark replied, sudden realization dawning. "The neural disruption has destabilized the quantum entanglement, but the patterns are still there, just fragmented. If we eject it now, the entity might be able to reconstitute itself using the ship's quantum communication array as a template instead of Tao's consciousness." Then what do you suggest? We can't maintain emergency containment indefinitely, Quark thought rapidly, drawing on everything he knew about quantum entanglement and consciousness transfer. We need to give it somewhere else to go, a quantum sink that can absorb its energy without allowing it to maintain coherent patterns. The black hole, Silva realized. If we can create a small, contained replica of the event horizon's quantum properties, we could draw the entity into it. Quark finished. Like a quantum magnet. Is that even possible? Lon demanded. Theoretically, Quark admitted. The predictive light was designed to interact with the quantum properties of an event horizon. If we reverse its function, we might be able to create a localized quantum singularity, not a true black hole, but a quantum state with similar properties in terms of information processing. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less if we can salvage parts from the neural disruptor. Oh, do it, Lon ordered. We'll maintain emergency containment as long as possible. As Quark and Silva worked frantically to modify the predictive light's quantum core, the entity continued its erratic fluctuations. Sometimes it seemed almost dormant, its energy signature barely registering on the ship's sensors. At other times, it would surge against the containment field with renewed vigor, causing systems throughout the ship to temporarily malfunction. Most disturbing were the moments when Tao's voice would emerge from the chaotic energy, sometimes speaking nonsensical fragments of scientific theories, sometimes crying out in what sounded like genuine distress. Quark tried to shut out these sounds as he worked, focusing entirely on the delicate quantum manipulations required to create the singularity trap. Almost there, he muttered, making a final adjustment to the modified device. The quantum matrix is stable, and the containment field is properly calibrated. Now we just need to position it correctly and hope the entity is attracted to its quantum signature. Like calling to like, Silva observed. Quantum resonance across dimensional boundaries. They returned to the quarantine bay's observation room, the modified predictive light humming with barely contained energy. Through the reinforced glass, they could see the entity still fluctuating between states, its form sometimes spreading to fill the entire chamber, sometimes contracting to a small, dense point of darkness. What's happening to it? Lon asked, joining them in the observation room. The neural disruption damaged its ability to maintain a stable form in our dimension, Silva explained. It's cycling through different quantum states, trying to find one that allows it to remain coherent. And some of those states include Tao's consciousness, Quark added quietly, watching as the entity briefly took on a recognizable human shape before dissolving again. The entanglement wasn't completely broken. Let's finish this, Lon said grimly. How do we deploy the device? Varus, we need to place it inside the quarantine bay, Quark replied. The quantum field has to envelop the entity directly. That's suicide, Lon objected. The moment the containment field is breached enough to insert the device, that thing could escape. Not necessarily, Silva interjected. The entity is weakened, its coherence fractured. If we time it correctly, inserting the device during one of its contracted phases, we might be able to activate it before the entity can expand again. Lon considered this, weighing the risks against their dwindling options. I'll do it, she finally decided. As security chief, it's my responsibility. No, Quark countered firmly. It has to be me. The device needs final calibration at the moment of activation, tuned precisely to the entity's current quantum signature. I'm the only one who can make those adjustments quickly enough. Before Lon could argue further, the entity suddenly contracted to its smallest state yet, a dense point of swirling darkness no larger than a human fist, pulsing in the center of the quarantine bay. Now! Quark exclaimed, grabbing the modified predictive light and rushing to the quarantine bay's airlock. The next moments passed in a blur of focused action. The outer airlock door opened. Quark stepped inside with the device, and the door sealed behind him. He waited, watching through the inner door's viewport as the entity continued to pulse in its contracted state. Containment field, partial deactivation in 3, 2, 1, came Lan's voice over his communication implant. The inner airlock door slid open just enough for Quark to squeeze through with the device. The quarantine bay was filled with a strange, oppressive energy that made the air itself seem thick and resistant to movement. The entity remained contracted in the center of the room, its pulsations becoming more rapid as it sensed his presence. Quark moved quickly but carefully, placing the modified predictive light on the floor directly beneath the hovering point of darkness. His fingers flew over the controls, making final adjustments to the quantum matrix based on the entity's current signature. "Device planted," he reported tersely, beginning final calibration. The entity's pulsations suddenly accelerated, the point of darkness beginning to expand outward. Quark worked faster, knowing he had seconds at most before it regained enough coherence to attack. Almost there, quantum resonance established. Initiating singularity formation. The device hummed louder, a sphere of distorted space beginning to form above it. Not darkness, like a true black hole, but a strange, shimmering distortion that seemed to bend light and matter around its edges. The expanding entity suddenly halted its growth, the swirling darkness drawn inexorably toward the artificial quantum singularity. For a moment, it seemed to resist, tendrils of shadow stretching away from the pull, only to be drawn back with greater force. Then, just as the entity was about to be completely absorbed into the singularity, it made one final, desperate attempt at communication. The swirling darkness briefly formed into a perfect replica of Tao's face, her eyes meeting Quark's with an expression of mingled fear and acceptance. "It's okay," the face said in Tao's voice, but this time, something about it rang true, carrying the weight of genuine emotion rather than simulation. "This is where I belong now, between worlds, studying what no human has ever seen before." "Tao," Quark whispered, momentarily frozen. "Is that really you?" The face seemed to smile sadly. "Parts of me, fragments, enough to know this is right. The entity was wrong to force this merging. But what I've learned..." Quark. "The universe is so much stranger and more beautiful than we ever imagined." Before Quark could respond, the face dissolved back into swirling darkness, which was rapidly pulled into the growing singularity. With a final surge of energy that knocked Quark backward against the quarantine bay wall, the entity disappeared completely into the artificial event horizon. The modified predictive light gave a high-pitched whine as its quantum matrix reached critical instability. Quark barely had time to scramble back through the airlock before the device imploded, collapsing the artificial singularity and everything it had contained into a microscopic point that winked out of existence with a final, anticlimactic pop. Silence fell over the quarantine bay, broken only by the sound of the ship's systems returning to normal operation and the hiss of the ventilation system clearing the air of residual energy. "Entity containment confirmed," reported the sensor officer from the command center. "No residual quantum signatures detected." Quark slumped against the airlock door, exhaustion and delayed shock washing over him. Silva rushed to his side, scanning him for injuries or quantum contamination. "Are you all right?" she asked urgently. "Did it touch you?" "I'm fine," he assured her, though his voice was hollow. "It's gone, all of it, including whatever was left of Tao." Lan approached more slowly, her military bearing softened somewhat by genuine concern. You took an unacceptable risk, Engineer Nguyen. But, thank you. You saved the ship and possibly much more. Did I? Kwok asked quietly. In those final moments, it really seemed like some part of the real Tao was still in there. What if we just destroyed the greatest opportunity for scientific advancement in human history? Or prevented the greatest threat? Lan countered gently. We'll never know for certain. But we made the choice we had to make with the information we had. In the days that followed, the Argo X began its long journey back to Earth. The ship's systems returned fully to normal, with no trace of the entity's influence remaining in any of its quantum processors or biological components. The crew gradually recovered from the ordeal, though many reported strange dreams of shadows and whispered voices that faded upon waking. Kwok spent much of his time analyzing the data they had managed to salvage from both the original predictive light experiment and the entity encounter. Most of it was fragmented and corrupted, but enough remained to confirm that something truly extraordinary had occurred, something that challenged humanity's fundamental understanding of consciousness. Quantum physics, and the nature of reality itself. 1 week after the entity's destruction, as Kwok was working late in the science lab, the door slid open to admit Silva. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. You need to rest, she admonished, placing one of the cups beside him. You've been at this for 20 hours straight. Kwok accepted the coffee gratefully, but didn't stop his work. There's something here, Marta, in the quantum fluctuation patterns just before the entity was destroyed. Look at this. He pointed to a complex series of energy waves displayed on his screen. These aren't random. They're organized, patterned, almost like a language or code. I think in those final moments, either Tao or the entity or both were trying to tell us something. Silva studied the patterns with a scientist's objective eye. It's intriguing, certainly, but it could also be an artifact of the quantum singularity formation, or even a product of your own desire to find meaning. Maybe, Kwok acknowledged. But what if it's not? What if this is Tao's final gift to us, a glimpse of whatever she experienced beyond the event horizon? Then we'll study it, analyze it, and learn from it. Silva said gently, just as she would have wanted, but we'll do it carefully, cautiously, with all the proper scientific protocols. Kwok nodded slowly, remembering Tao's dedication to rigorous scientific methodology even in the face of her own burning curiosity. You're right, that's what she would have wanted. As they prepared the ship's final approach to Earth several weeks later, the crew gathered in the memorial hall to honor Tao's sacrifice. A holographic image of her stood at the center of the room, compiled from ship records and personal photographs. Tao as she had been in life, brilliant and determined, with that spark of insatiable curiosity in her eyes. Captain Lan led the ceremony with uncharacteristic emotion in her voice. Dr. Lamin Tao gave her life not once, but twice for this mission and this crew. First, when she entered the isolation chamber to save us from the quantum feedback, and again when whatever remained of her consciousness was lost in our struggle against the entity that called itself Vestige. We cannot know what she experienced beyond the event horizon, or how much of her remained in what returned to us, but we can honor her courage, her brilliance, and her unwavering commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. One by one, crew members shared memories of Tao, her intensity during theoretical debates, her unexpected humor in tense moments, her kindness to junior scientists intimidated by her reputation. When Kwok's turn came, he stepped forward with a small data crystal in his hand. Tao once told me that the purpose of science isn't just to discover what exists, but to question the boundaries of existence itself. He began quietly. She believed that consciousness, that quintessentially human quality, might be the universe's way of understanding itself. I don't know if what we encountered was truly Tao in some transformed state, or an alien entity using her voice and memories, or something beyond our current ability to categorize. But I do know this. Whatever it was challenged us to expand our conception of reality, just as Tao always did in life. He placed the data crystal on the memorial pedestal. This contains all the salvageable data from our encounter, including the patterned quantum fluctuations from the entity's final moments. I've spent weeks trying to decode them without success. But perhaps someday, someone will understand what Tao, or whatever she became, was trying to tell us. Until then, we continue her work. We question. We explore. We push boundaries, not recklessly, but with the caution that comes from knowing just how vast and strange the universe truly is. The Argo X docked at the Earth's orbital station 2 days later, its crew disembarking to a muted welcome. The Astronomical Council had been briefed on the mission's outcome and the entity encounter, but had classified much of the information as too sensitive for public dissemination. The official story was that Dr. Lamin Tao had died heroically during a containment breach near the black hole, sacrificing herself to save the ship and crew. In the months that followed, Kwok and Silva presented their findings to a special committee of Earth's foremost physicists, neurologists, and xenobiologists. The data they had salvaged from the entity encounter sparked heated debates and conflicting interpretations, with some scientists dismissing the entire incident as a form of mass hallucination induced by proximity to the black hole's exotic radiation. But a small, dedicated group, including Kwok and Silva, continued to study the patterned quantum fluctuations from the entity's final moments. They established a new research division focused on what they cautiously termed transdimensional consciousness studies, operating under strict safety protocols developed from the Argo X experience. 1 year after their return, Kwok stood on the observation deck of the new research station orbiting Earth, looking out at the stars that now seemed both more familiar and more mysterious than ever before. "Are we any closer?" asked Silva, joining him at the viewport. "To understanding the patterns?" "No," Kwok admitted. "But that's not surprising, if they really are communication from a consciousness that exists across dimensions. It might take decades or even centuries to develop the framework needed to interpret them." "And the convergence the entity warned about?" Kwok shook his head. "No sign of the phenomena it described. Either it was lying to manipulate us, or the time frame it was operating on is vastly different from our own." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching distant ships moving against the backdrop of stars. "Do you ever wonder," Silva asked eventually, "if it's still out there somewhere, the entity, or some part of Tao?" Kwok considered this, remembering the entity's final words through Tao's face. "Between worlds, studying what no human has ever seen before. I think," he said slowly, "that there are forms of existence we can barely begin to comprehend, whether Tao's consciousness survived in some form or was truly lost. I don't know. But I like to believe that something of her endures, her curiosity, her drive to understand the universe in all its strangeness and beauty." "A poetic thought from a quantum engineer," Silva teased gently. Kwok smiled. "Tao would have said that at the furthest edges of science. Poetry is sometimes the only language we have left." Later that night, alone in his quarters, Kwok reviewed the mysterious quantum patterns once more, a ritual he had performed countless times since their return. As always, they remained stubbornly opaque, revealing no clear meaning despite all his efforts. As he was about to power down his terminal, a notification appeared, a minor anomaly in Earth's deep space monitoring network. For a brief moment, sensors had detected an unusual quantum fluctuation in the vicinity of Sagittarius Abyss, with a signature that bore striking similarities to the patterns he had been studying. It was probably nothing, a sensor glitch, or a natural phenomenon the scientists didn't yet understand. But as Quark stared at the notification, he couldn't help but wonder if it might be something more, a distant echo of whatever Tau had become, reaching across the void between worlds. He saved the data and closed the terminal, looking up through his viewport at the star-filled sky. Out there in the darkness between stars, in the quantum substrate underlying reality itself, perhaps there were forms of consciousness watching, waiting, preparing to make contact again. And when they did, humanity would need to be ready, not with fear, but with caution tempered by the same boundless curiosity that had driven Tau beyond the event horizon and into the unknown.